All right, well, hello everybody. My name is Chris Meny. I'm the content manager and director of website development at GOLDBIO Technology. I want to thank everybody who's logged in and watching our webinar today. GOLDBIO is a supplier of proven and published and affordable reagents and chemicals for research labs and small businesses all over the world. We specialize in thousands of day-to-day reagents that you need for the lab, but at affordable rates that you can discover more. Check out our website for all of our products at goldbio.com. So we have two wonderful guests today sharing how to use better storytelling in order to improve your science communication. First, we have Dr. Justine Dees, who is a PhD-trained microbiologist turned science communicator. She's the founder of Joyful Microbe and the co-founder of SciComm Society. Dr. Dees also offers scientific writing and editing services, science communication consulting, as well as microbiology consulting services to academics and corporate clients. Her expertise includes many areas of biological research, including microbiology, molecular biology, bioinformatics, genomics, genetics, and so many, many more. And we also have Dr. Sarah Wettstadt, who is a microbiologist trained scientific writer and communicator, publishing for both professional associations and life science organizations. She runs the blog Bacterial World in order to share the diverse and colorful activities of microbes and bacteria, as well as Sunny Scientist, which is a blog dedicated to supporting researchers in their busy scientific days. As a science communication manager and blog post commissioner, Dr. Wettstadt writes about biological and environmental topics for both expert and non-expert audiences, and she co-founded SciComm Society in order to help coach and mentor scientists for better communication. So welcome to both of you. I'm so excited to have you guys with us today.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today for this webinar on using storytelling in science communication. A couple of years ago, Sarah and I co-founded SciComm Society because we recognized a need for scientists to have better communication tools. We both come from a science background, having done our PhDs and postdocs in microbiology labs working with bacteria. So we both know how important it is to share scientific research with the world. Our motto at SciComm Society is share science with the world, change people's lives, because we truly believe that when the public has an understanding of science, they can apply it to their lives in meaningful ways. But sometimes the way scientists communicate can be confusing. It simply lacks impact. So, our goal with SciComm Society is to provide tools to help scientists effectively share their research with their audience, whether it be the public or other scientists in their field or an adjacent field. And we feel that one of the best science communication tools is storytelling. So I'll turn it over to Sarah now to tell you a bit more about why storytelling is important, because I think a lot of us don't know the best way to go about this. I know I felt that way when was getting started in science communication. So on to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Justine. And thanks to Chris and Karen for giving us the opportunity today to talk to you. So as Justine just said, today we're going to talk about storytelling and science communication. Some of you may have heard that storytelling is actually a really nice tool to share your research, but you may have some doubts about how this tool can actually help you communicate your science. So I will start by telling you why storytelling is important in science communication, and then later we will go through some different ways of how to apply storytelling in your projects. So when you look at, or when you compare the way you collect your scientific data with how you communicate your scientific data, you can see there's a huge difference. When doing your experiments, you know that you often run multiple experiments at the same time. You're trying to answer different research questions. You have all these complex and complicated data. There's often no clear beginning to your research question. There's sometimes no clear end because there's always more. There's always another question coming up. And as a scientist, you have all the background knowledge of your topic. You know everything. You know every little detail of your project and of your question of your topic. Well, if you compare that with science communication, they tell us that to communicate science, it needs to be way more straightforward. You need to have one clear storyline. You want to answer just one question in your communication effort. So you need to have one clear beginning and one clear end. And something many scientists unfortunately often forget is that the recipient, the audience, has only a limited background knowledge on the research topic. And as Justine said, since we're both coming from the scientific world ourselves, we know how challenging it is to present all these complex and complicated scientific data logically and coherently to make your audience understand your research project. So one way we found for science communication to be efficient is through stories. Why is that? It has to do with how our brains processes information. Our brain always tries to make logical connections between a cause and an effect. And this activity is completely automatic. It helped our ancestors survive in the wild, just as today it helps you in your daily life. So if you think about how your ancestors sometimes saw a lion in the wild and they thought, oh, if I walk towards this lion, it will eat me and I'm going to die, so I better hide now. Well, today your thoughts are, thank God, not that dramatic anymore. But if you see a red light, and your thoughts are probably something like, hey, if I walk at this red light, a car might hit me. I might not die, but something might happen. So I better stop now. So both of these sequences are series of events, and these events are logically connected with each other. So these events are in the end stories. Something happens, it triggers a person to feel a certain way, it causes them to act a certain way, and this reaction triggers another emotion and another reaction. So as you can see, stories have always been with us. Stories were the first things that our ancestors told each other around campfires. And when you look at 2 or 3-year-olds, you know that they tell themselves a lot of stories to understand the world around them. They make up all sorts of stories. And just as them, our adult brains are trying to comprehend the world by making logical sense of it. And studies even show that when we understand a fact or concept through a story, we will understand it way better. And chances are higher that we will remember it. So if you want someone to understand an important fact or your research project, it's really effective to pack it into a story with logical connections. So that's why we think the storytelling approach is incredibly valuable for science communication. But how do you actually tell a good story? To answer this question, we came up with 4 pillars. First of all is the emotions. Second is the so-called hero's journey. Then we have the way to use powerful action verbs. And lastly is the logical and engaging connection of your science story. And throughout this presentation, we will walk you through all of these pillars now. So we're starting with why do we need emotions in science communication? So as I said in the introduction, our brain is constantly trying to understand the world around us. It protects us and it needs to keep us alive and well. But as you know, our brain is locked up in our body, sorry. It has no direct contact to the outside world. So it can only rely on those information that it gets through our senses. We see, we hear, we smell, we taste, we feel, and all this information our brain is gathering. But the brain is not only listening or sensing the outside information, it also listens and senses what's going on the inside. We have emotions, we have energies, our body has a certain health status. So in every situation, the brain is connecting all these information and saves them. And these are the so-called stories that the brain is telling us in every moment of our lives. So when you look at your own daily life, what happens throughout your day, you can see these kind of stories as well. Sometimes we feel happy or proud when our experiment works and it finally gives us some conclusive results. Super awesome. Or sometimes we feel jealous because a colleague was granted a big research grant and our application was rejected. Or in another instance, maybe we didn't even apply for this grant and now we feel regret because it seemed it wasn't that competitive after all. So in all of these situations, our brain is trying to tell us a little story. And when a similar situation comes up later, it comes up with the same story and it tells us, oh, this is what happened last time, so now this time we should probably do this. So for example, with the experiment, because we were so happy and proud, we're probably going to use the same experimental conditions again. But if you look at the last example, we felt regret. It's not a nice feeling. We all know that. So now we're probably going to apply for this grant because we want that money and it didn't seem to be that competitive. So let's do it. So when it comes to research and emotions, or let's say researchers always like to categorize things. So they even categorized emotions. And they found a class of emotion that is related to information processing. And our brain creates these so-called epistemic emotions when we encounter something new that we lack information about. And this class of emotions helps us make sense of the world and understand it better. So in the following slides, we will go through 4 of these epistemic emotions, which are curiosity, confusion, wonder, and awe. And we will look at different ways of how to trigger the emotions in your audience with your science story. But one thing, please take into account that everyone perceives emotions differently and uniquely. The emotional instances that we describe here are based on our own life experiences or on definition explanation from the literature. So be aware that you may have your own way of understanding an emotion based on your own experience and information processing, and so will your audience. So there's no right or wrong here of how to sense an emotion. It's just the general understanding of these kinds of emotions. Okay, let's start with curiosity. You probably all know this emotion. It's defined as the internal drive to know something just for the sake of knowing. So to experience the emotion of curiosity, we need to be aware of a knowledge gap. So we already know something about a particular topic, but then we realize there's some missing fact, something we don't understand yet, something doesn't quite make sense yet to us. And this is the knowledge gap. And for some, these knowledge gaps can feel like a physical pain that our brain wants to ease. But to ease this pain, we need to acquire new information. We need to learn something new. And once we learn something about this field or we get new piece of information, we become aware that there are more knowledge gaps within that field. And this sparks more curiosity. And we can even spread that curiosity with others because we share our knowledge. So this means that curiosity is contagious. It's ever growing. So when you tell your science story, you want to spread that curiosity about your research and make sure your audience understands these knowledge gaps. Next, we have confusion. For many, confusion is very uncomfortable. We sometimes experience this when things don't quite make sense to us yet. But confusion grows from curiosity. But it's just a situation when the new information that we got don't quite make sense yet. It doesn't quite fit into how our brain sees the world. And confusion is a bit like when your muscle burns during a hard workout. But in the end, you realize you're getting stronger. You need this. So the same way it is for our brain, it needs to feel this discomfort when it's about to learn something new. But the important thing with confusion is the level of unpleasantness. If you're too confused about something, it can be really demotivating. It's just too much. Nothing makes really sense. So you're kind of giving up. And if the discomfort is not strong enough, you might not feel the need to actually ease that pain. You may get bored and you do not have any motivation to make sense of the new information. So again, you give up. So during a science communication project, you want your audience to be just in the right state of confusion. You want them to pause, think about what they heard, and try to make sense of what they learned. Next, we have the emotion of wonder. The emotion of wonder is probably very different to all of us. For some, it's comparable to the feeling of surprise when something rare or unexpected happens. For others, it motivates them to seek understanding, and it's closely linked to curiosity and the drive of intellectual exploration. Social scientists actually think that the emotion of wonder is unique in humans, and it's highly important to our nature. And they say that it drives our passion for exploration, for learning, and even for adventure, for nature. So in your science communication project, you should remember that wonder inspires your audience and their desire to gain understanding and explain new ideas. Lastly, we have awe. Awe is like the grand finale of understanding and learning. You finally close that knowledge gap, and it leaves you with that sweet and satisfying and inspiring feeling of awe. But at the same time, you're aware of the vastness of the question. You may even feel overwhelmed by how huge or phenomenal this question was and the knowledge gap in the first place. For some, awe triggers them to see the world completely differently. They may gain a new understanding of what is going on around them, and they may even start thinking and living completely differently afterwards. For example, you may experience awe when you look at the complete collection of your experimental data. It finally clicks. You sit down, you have a moment, everything makes sense. You develop a new model that potentially explains your whole research question, your whole research topic. And you're in full awe of your results and your model. And everything seems a little brighter and a little lighter. So in your science communication project, it should be your goal to create moments of awe for your audience by helping them to learn something new, close their knowledge gaps, and care about new things. So if we now put all of these together and we want to use emotions, we want to use emotions to help your audience crave information. And it's like a circle. You can start with curiosity by giving your audience some feedback, some background information, and make them aware of a knowledge gap. Next, you trigger just a perfect amount of confusion by giving them new information, and they get this confused state of how does it all fit together? And then by explaining them how the new information fills the knowledge gap, they become wondrous. Let's hope so. And lastly, you want to tell your audience how this knowledge gap and the new information fits into the big picture, so they get into the state of awe for your field. So this is how emotions work in storytelling. Next, we talk about the second pillar. And the second pillar of storytelling is the so-called hero's journey. Maybe you know this concept from movies or from books in which you meet a new character, a main character, and this character is facing a life-changing struggle. And then multiple steps occur, the movie develops, the book develops, and then the story ends with a resolution, and the character comes out stronger than before. And these steps are called the hero's journey, a model that we think also works really well in science communication. So in the next couple of slides, we will go through the different components of the hero's journey, and we'll explain how to create your story based on it. So generally, you can think of the hero's journey as two main steps. You introduce a key player, and you have your key player experiencing some struggles so that it needs to change and resolve the struggle to get out stronger at the end. So in your research project, you probably focus on several interesting questions, so many topics, so many components involved, and each of them is probably a potential story. But for a research project, you want to talk about only one of these components. You only want to talk about one story. So make sure for your science communication project to pick one story for which you have all the components of the hero's journey available that we will go through now. So let's start by identifying a key player. Your key player is this one component that is doing all the work in your research project. Your whole story will revolve around this key player. So we brought this little example because we're both from the microbiology field. We came up with a research topic of how microbes use nanotubes to exchange nutrients. This is the researcher's topic, and obviously the key player here are microbes. Just a little background information, what are we talking about? So there's these bacteria that you can see here in the electron microscopy picture, and they form little nanotubes. They're like tunnels in which they send stuff to send them to other microbes. So, yes. In the next step, you want your audience to relate to your key player and you want them to care for it. And to achieve this, we need to humanize it. We give it a personality trait. This personality trait can be anything from a physical ability or a character trait. The only thing you need to consider here is that the personality trait is important for how your story develops. So in our case, we say that our microbes, which are the key players, are generous and they love to share food. Next, we want to tell our audience about the struggles and challenges that our key player is facing. This struggle should relate directly to your research question. It's probably the same problem that you are facing about your research subject. It may be a bit difficult to reformulate your research question into something relatable, but try to find like a real life struggle that everyone can understand. So in our example, we say that the microbes, they struggle because they lack the means to send food to their friends. Everyone can relate to that. Microbes are generous, they want to share stuff, but they lack the means to do that. So yeah, it's fairly relatable. So lastly, we need our hero to go through some kind of change. And only with this change can they actually resolve their struggle. And this change can be triggered by additional players, by the player's personality trait, or by some kind of inner motivation. So for your science story, this change probably represents the results that you found in your experiments. You ask a research question and you got interesting results. And now these results become your key player struggle and the change it goes through. So in our example, the microbes, they change because they build nanotubes to share food. And the resolution is, in this case, that everyone has food and everyone survives. So if we now put all of these components together, we actually have a little story to tell. And this is that microbes, which are the key players, are generous and love to share their food. But they lack the means to send food to their microbial friends, which is the struggle. Therefore, they build nanotubes as a change to connect to other microbes to share food with them, which is the resolution. So we know that this is very simple now. So your research topic is probably way more complex than this. You can add secondary characters, foes, additional struggles. You can have several ups and downs of your story. You can even add visuals to convey your message a bit better and support your story. So now that you have all the components to set up your science story, and you know that your story should trigger emotions like curiosity, confusion, wonder, and awe, now we need to stitch all of these components together and actually tell that story. So Justine will now tell you more about how to create the flow between these components and come up with an engaging story for your research project. Stage is yours.
Thanks, Sarah. So when you tell your science story, there's a certain way you can go about it that will really make an impact. And that is through the use of powerful action verbs to explain what your key player is doing. Choosing what words to use can be challenging for scientists, mainly due to the way that we, as scientists, were taught to write. This is because scientific findings describe static results that don't change, so they are explained as fixed states. But in science communication stories, we usually have a series of action-packed events involving key players. That's why, to tell a science story, it is better to use active language that explains processes as action-packed events. This will help move your story forward in a way that your reader can visualize and relate to. But how do you explain these action-packed events with active language? And it comes down to the verbs that you use in your sentences. So here we will look at 5 ways to tell a relatable science story by paying attention to the verbs. The first way we'll do that is using active voice. Unfortunately, scientists tend to use passive voice in papers to describe their scientific findings or experimental results. And passive voice is something is done by someone, but active voice is someone does something. It's not always a bad thing. It's useful in the methods section of your papers. But when it comes to outreach projects and to tell stories, you want your reader to understand that your key player does something actively. So it's better to use active voice to describe movement, action, and progress. And so we'll look at an example now. Here's an example of a phrase you might see in a scientific publication. In passive voice, it's bacterial lipid transporters are used as a mechanism for membrane growth. The problem is this sentence lacks a key player and any real action other than something is used. Where is the key player? Where is the action? This sentence only states a fact. So how can we improve the sentence to make it more accessible? In active voice, it goes something like this. Bacteria use lipid transporters to grow their membranes. Now the sentence has a key player, bacteria, and they do something, use lipid transporters. This moves the story forward because something you can actually imagine happens, but it contains the same content as the first sentence. Another major benefit of using active voice is that the sentences get shorter quite often, making your writing more succinct. So using active voice is a way to help declutter your sentences, which your readers will appreciate since it makes the content easier to read. Another key way to pay attention to the verbs in your story is to state positive facts. You want to explain what happened, not what did not happen. Unfortunately, stating the negative is all too common in scientific writing. But this use of verbs is often vague and unclear, which can be counterproductive. You might even confuse your audience, leaving them wondering what exactly your key player did or what really happened to it. For example, by telling your reader bacteria did not survive, your audience might ask themselves, what actually even happened? If the bacteria did not survive, what happened to them? We know that precision matters in science, so here it is better to write bacteria died. Now we have one key player, bacteria, and one action died. Stating negative facts also creates longer sentences, which we talked about earlier as clutter. Being succinct helps your audience to better understand what you're communicating because they have less to remember. So, stating a positive fact helps you write shorter phrases while leaving the meaning of the content the same. A way to use powerful action verbs is to avoid scientific verbal phrases. And so, what do I mean by that? When you're describing your experimental results in your paper, it's likely you're going to use scientific jargon. But as you're probably aware, not everyone from outside of the scientific community is familiar with your field's scientific jargon. So if you're presenting to the general public, they may not follow your line of thought because they don't know the language of your field. If you want your audience to actually get your science story, make sure to use the language of your audience. This simply means instead of using the scientific phrase like acquire nutrients, you're better off using simple action verbs. In this case, you could just say eat. Everyone knows what the action of eating involves, and yet it means the same as acquiring nutrients. Try to put yourself in your audience's shoes and identify the scientific jargon you could replace with simpler verbs to help your audience picture your story. Another way to pay attention to how you use verbs in your story is to keep the subject and verb together. In your writing, the goal of an action-packed sentence is to describe your key player doing something. In our case, the key player is the subject, and the action of doing something is the verb. In a sentence, these two parts, the subject and the verb, should always be close together so your audience can quickly understand the key information. Avoid putting additional information between these two parts. Keeping the subject and verb too far apart forces your audience to remember too much information. And remember, they're only just becoming familiar with this information. So here's an example. While I read this, notice the placement of the subject and verb in the sentence. A transcription factor of the nitrogen-fixing soybean endosymbiont Bradyrhizobium japonicum, which responds to the intracellular oxygen concentration, undergoes CLIP-mediated regulated proteolysis. Here, the subject is a transcription factor and the verb is undergoes proteolysis. But look how far apart the subject and verb are. Can you see how confusing it is to have that much information between your subject and verb? Your reader needs to go through all that side information before getting to the key verb and thus the key message of the sentence. So keep your subject together with your verb and add the additional information after it. You might even want to split up the sentences to highlight each piece of information. So in this case, the sentence can be improved by writing, the nitrogen-fixing soybean endosymbiont Radiorhizobium japonicum produces a transcription factor that responds to the intracellular oxygen concentration. This transcription factor also undergoes CLIP-mediated regulated proteolysis. See how the subject, a transcription factor, and the verb undergoes CLIP-mediated regulated proteolysis are much closer together. Obviously, this is pretty complex information. I mean, it's a mouthful. So putting these two pieces of information close together makes the sentence easier to read and comprehend. The last way you can pay attention to the verbs in your story is to avoid nominalizations. What are nominalizations? They are phrases that contain verbs changed into nouns. Unfortunately, scientific papers rely heavily on nominalizations. When phrases that contain verbs are changed into nouns, it actually removes the action. Instead of saying make a decision or give consideration to, use the action verbs decide or consider. Nominalizations also clutter sentences and extend them for no reason. As I mentioned before, it is better to be clear and brief about the action in a sentence. And as you can see, these verbs are a lot shorter and more direct than the nominalization version. Now we're going to talk about connecting the different parts of your science story. Earlier, Sarah shared about the different parts of your science story, a key player with certain personality traits, its struggles, the change it goes through to overcome these struggles, and the solution it reaches. Now we need to connect these parts into a coherent narration. Remember, our brains prefer logical steps, and that's where the and, but, therefore method comes in. This method is a simple framework to connect the different parts of your story into a narrative. The ABT method was originally described by Randy Olson in the book Houston, We Have a Narrative. And this framework is super simple, but it will help you take the different parts of your science story and link them with the connectors and, but, and therefore. In the and section, you simply provide some background information. You introduce your key player and describe its personality traits and connect the information with and. These pieces of information have equal value and don't necessarily need to be logically connected. For example, microbes, our key players, are generous, which is their personality trait, and love to share food. So remember, this is what Sarah shared with you. And the second part introduces the struggles of your key player using but. It should be contrary to what was said before, and it should be connected to the content of the previous sentence. So here's our example again. Microbes are generous and love to share their food, but they lack the means to send food to their microbial friends, which introduces their struggle. The final part is the change and solution, which is introduced by therefore. This piece of information is connected to the content of the previous sentences and describes the change your key player goes through to overcome the struggle using its personality traits. So microbes are generous, they love to share their food, but they lack the means to send food to their microbial friends. Therefore, they build nanotubes, which is their change, to connect to other microbes to share food with them, which brings us to the solution. Let's put everything together that we talked about. So we have our little story, and of course it's really simplified, as Sarah said, but this paragraph contains all the elements we talked about today so far. It conveys scientific information. It tells us how microbial communities share their food. It introduces a key player and its personality traits, its struggle, and a solution triggered by a change. Microbial communities do something actively to overcome and share food with each other. It also triggers some emotions in your reader. It triggers confusion as we define the knowledge gap. If they can share food, how do they actually do it? Wonder and awe to stun your audience. These tiny microbes have sophisticated machines that help them keep the community thriving. And curiosity, because we provide room for questions. How do nanotubes work? How does the community know when to use them? How does the food get transported? And what type of nutrients are they sharing? It can go on and on. We also use powerful action verbs: send, build, connect, and share. And it doesn't use any scientific jargon. All the words are clear to non scientists. But of course, you can adjust the use of scientific language to suit your particular audience. And it connects the different pieces of information logically and clearly using and, but, and therefore. As you know, science communication is essential to ensure that the public understands the information of scientific research and its impact on society. Hopefully, we've convinced you that storytelling is a powerful tool that can help you communicate complex scientific concepts and research to any audience in an engaging and relatable way. The reason why stories are so powerful is that they trigger emotions. And now you know that emotions help people remember things. By creating a compelling narrative, you can create an emotional response of curiosity, the right amount of confusion and wonder and awe, so people remember your amazing science story. So now it's your turn. Go out, share your science story with others, evoke emotion, and motivate people to remember it for the rest of their lives. We appreciate the opportunity to share about using storytelling in science communication today. And if you would like to learn more about science communication, we have plenty of resources. You can check out our website at SciCommSociety.com. We also have a free email course called Making an Impact that will help you learn how to reach a broader audience with your science communication efforts. We also have a storytelling guide that this webinar was based on, but it goes into a bit more detail and walks you through creating your scientific story, along with lots of practical tips to help you along the way. We also have other guides and courses on how to write well, how to tailor your science story to the appropriate level for your specific audience, and also how to get started in a SciComm career. We also offer personalized support. So if you need something like that, we offer one-on-one SciComm coaching. And lastly, you can get a free copy of the slides from this presentation on our website, which you'll receive an email about. And if you're interested in any of these resources, all of the images on this particular slide are clickable and will take you to the corresponding page. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll be happy to take any questions you have.
Great. Thanks. Thanks very much. I loved it. So just a couple questions that I have. I know somebody was asking for the title of that book that you quoted, the Houston, it's called Houston, We Have a Narrative, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And who wrote that again?
Randy Olson.
Awesome. Excellent. So I got a couple questions I want to ask. So, are there maybe different ways or better ways to use some of those specific storytelling elements that you and Sarah described, depending on what kind of communication you're doing? For instance, we write scientific articles, and those kind of and it's almost like those things have to be a certain form, right? As opposed to when we're giving presentations or seminars, right? Are there ways that you think certain things should be done more so than in other ways, or is this kind of a general rule across the board?
I think that it can be adapted depending on how formal the situation is. But I think that like one part that really can be used all throughout storytelling is the ABT method. It works for papers and anytime you have to explain something. How much I mean, I guess even with, you know, the ABT method, no matter what, it's going to evoke curiosity because you're
Right.
kind of presenting that, but, you know, such and such. And then it leaves them wondering what comes next. So is there anything you'd like to add, Sarah?
No, the only thing is probably that you would always modify your language, the words that you use according to your audience. So if you talk to a scientific audience, obviously you would use more scientific terms or scientific jargon, depending on where your audience comes from. If it's from the same field, they probably know most of the scientific terms that you're using during your daily days, during your normal days, and if you talk to scientists that are not from your field, they may not understand all the terms that you're using. So you may need to adapt your story a bit and weave in some explanations of those terms.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, it's like one of the things that I've heard many times over the years, like, scientists write for scientists, right? And that seems like it should be fine, but the reality is like even scientists outside of your sphere, right? So we all have these highly specific spheres of knowledge now. Um, where like I'm writing in molecular biology, but somebody in cell biology or bioinformatics has absolutely no idea of the jargon that I'm just familiar with. And so if I write, if they want to get into molecular biology, they're trying to use molecular biology in their bioinformatics, they have a steep learning curve just to understand the words I'm using. And that's just, and it's like, so I love the idea of like be a little bit more direct, be a little bit more simple, right? I've always said that I think scientists use big words just to sound smart.
Yeah, my thing with words is that we're already using scientific jargon quite often. So then just the words that go between the jargon can be simple just to ease a little bit of the mental load.
Right, right. So here's a question I have for you. So do you guys have any resources on SciComm Society or suggestions for putting together infographics to tell better stories?
that's a really good idea. Putting
Yeah, I
together.
know.
So we should be
Thank
expecting
you.
something like that in the future, right?
Yeah.
Excellent, awesome.
Yep, that's a great idea.
You
All
might
right, so
consider it, yeah.
yeah. So here's a question I have, right? So, and all too often I've been on this side of the boat, right? So my research project is actually really boring. Because sometimes you're just working in the nuts and bolts of research and you're trying to get all that information published, right? So will adding these kind of elements, right? Sometimes I worry about like adding these kind of elements where you're doing your hero journey or whatever. It kind of like artificially inflates what's really going on, right? So it kind of makes my research more fake sounding. I mean, do you guys see that at all, or do you think that like there's a need for that?
I don't think it's artificially inflated. I think just the opposite. It simplifies it. It makes it way more straightforward. Sometimes when you talk to scientists, they don't know what's what I meant at the beginning. They don't know where to start when they explain something. They give you a description of their research project, and they talk about this and this and this and this and this, and you're like, how does it all connect to each other? How is it all linked? More and more confusion. You give up at some point. While with the hero's journey, you actually take them from one point to the next, to the next. You link them, you guide them. That's what I always see as a writer, is where you take your audience by the hand and you guide them through your story, guide them through the path, and tell them, hey, look at this. This is what's happening here. And then you go to the next one. Hey, this is happening here. Instead of being everywhere and nowhere.
Right, exactly. And it was like, and I've mentored grad students and whatnot in writing, and you're writing and I'm like, they're asking me to proofread or review their, something that they're writing. And the first thing is like, if I'm starting to fall asleep, then you have a problem, right? I'm like, you have to generate some kind of interest for me, right? I love that hero's journey. I worry sometimes that we can anthropomorphize those elements, like that, bacteria don't really have a desire to feed their friends, or maybe they do. I don't know. It's kind of hard to know what a bacteria is thinking, right?
Can ask them.
Um,
Yeah,
but
I think that that's something that, I mean, a lot of advisors will tell you don't anthropomorphize, and I think that it really goes back to what is the audience that you're speaking to. I think that maybe, in our example, it was bacteria are generous or microbes are generous, and so maybe instead you would say microbes are, like, you wouldn't say are generous, but you would say, think of a person who's being generous. This is a similar situation, and it's more of, like this instead of are this.
right, exactly. So one more question I had come up. So, obviously AI is the big news over the last 5 years or so, right? So are you seeing that being used more in the writing? And do you think it's adding anything, or is it actually taking away from some things?
A big question.
It is a big question, right? So a lot
In
of
what context do you mean? Do you mean
well,
in like scientific papers, or do you mean in like web pages, with like articles online?
Well, so let's start with the easy. I don't think anybody's going to be using. I don't think any good scientist is going to be using AI to write their articles for them, right? But let's talk about the science communication. So I'm trying to communicate my research project, not for a publication, but just to try to get people aware of what my science is. I'm trying to get more notoriety for it, so therefore I can write better grants or get more money for it, right? So are you seeing AI being used in those applications at all? Or have you
I
used AI at all?
I could see how it could be useful for someone who is trying to try to see things from an outside perspective, because you can ask the AI to act like a high schooler and, read whatever you're writing and then ask questions. So that would be one way that I could see someone trying to figure out their audience when maybe they feel fully removed because they're so deep into it. I mean, that's what happens to us as scientists. Like, we get so far into it that like Sarah said, we don't know where to begin. And if we don't have someone sitting in front of us that we can say, start to describe it and say, is this a good place to start, or should I back up a little bit? And so if you need someone and you don't have the time to set up a meeting or go hang out with a friend right in the moment, you're just like, I just need to get this done. The AI could function in that way, I would think. Instead of writing something for you, it could be, a way to have a conversation, like, to figure out, like, am I speaking to my audience properly or not?
It would be. It's so weird. Like I mean, I've used the AI a number of times, not as much as some people. I'm certainly not an expert on it, but it's so weird talking back and forth to this AI. Like, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure if it really understands or if it's just feeding back loop. But it's kind of interesting. Like you said, just to get a second opinion or a second
Hmm.
view, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so someone asked if you guys could on your SciComm Society have a list of simplified ideas to choose in place of complex ideas, right? So they're commonly cited in literature for various disciplines without changing any of the facts around. Maybe just again, just kind of an infographic or some way for people to go, oh, that's a better way of or a simple way of saying what I want to say, but I don't know how to start. Um, and I think that's the biggest problem one of the things that we have in science is that we're all taught to think and write so complicated, like in that passive tone. And it's so utterly complicated. And then, it's like I remember as a younger scientist, like literally going in and I would take a sentence like what you showed, right? And I would literally highlight the subject and the verb so that I could follow because I'm like, all this stuff is just like it just boggles my brain, right? As I'm trying to get used to reading. So
Yeah, and I think it's understandable though that if you read these papers, you think that that's how you should write. So you almost feel like, okay, I can't fix this. I just have to learn how to write in this
Right.
way. And you're kind of like breaking out and doing something strange if you actually, are intentional about using active voice more often.
Right.
So
Right.
it's really, I like, empathize with just just the struggle, of this is what's expected of us kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and honestly, it was like that's one of the biggest things that I found when transitioning from science writing for journal publications to writing for an audience, like starting the blogs that the GoldBIO started a number of years ago. And then like that transitioning from being passive tone or passive tense all the time to being more active because it's not engaging, right? If I'm reading a story, that passive tense is just not engaging. It's very off-putting. And and that's one of the struggles I had when I first started. And then as we've elevated other writers here at GoldBIO to write for our audiences, like in trying to get them to understand you're a scientist, but this is not the way people read, and watching their struggles and just and I mean we've had some great writers over the years, and you guys are really showing everything that I've been trying to incorporate into my writing group. And I think it's just amazing, right? So, question coming in from one of the audience: when inspiring the four emotions in audiences, are there certain strategies for targeting them, or does it mainly just come from an emotional presentation style?
No. So can go back to that
Sure.
little circle that we had. I mean, obviously, presenting your research project in an engaging way obviously makes a difference to help your, there you go, to convey those emotions. But here, this is what we wanted to say. What I wanted to say is that you trigger curiosity by giving your audience the background knowledge, and then you make them aware of the knowledge gap, so they become curious. So it's like, okay, this is what I know now, and this is the knowledge gap. So how does it all make sense? What's missing here? Why am I not getting it yet? So it's not about the style. It's really about providing the right amount of information in a logical and engaging way. The same later with the confusion, like bringing the audience into a confusion state. You give them the information, but you don't yet explain them how the whole thing fits into the knowledge gap. You do that later, and then you create that state of wonder. Because you help your audience understand how this knowledge gap can now be filled. And then this is it's more about the contextual manner of creating these emotions. I hope it makes sense.
Right. Well, I mean, so I think you're right about that, right? So, you've got to you've really got to start with that. It's like when this is why I did the research. This is why I'm doing the research. I wondered about something, right? So I was very curious, right? And
Yeah.
then, but I didn't understand how it worked. And then I started to figure out how it worked, and right? And then and then this is how this is the answer to how all this stuff worked. I mean, I found all throughout my life reading science papers, the ones that I love to read are the ones that followed this circle. And and it's like what I've experienced in my life is that some people are very good at telling these stories, but a lot of us aren't. And the ones that aren't, I just can't read that article. Like, like if the background doesn't get me interested in something, if it doesn't make me curious, you know, if it doesn't lead me to wonder how they came up with the next step of the experiment, then
Yeah.
I'm probably not going to really care about their conclusions.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And again, it's kind of what I said before. Like you start at the beginning and you create that arc, that storyline. You provide the right background knowledge. You show that knowledge gap. Then you show the confusion. You show how all of this fits together, and you put it all in the big picture so that more knowledge gaps become fine,
right,
instead of just talking something and then the new information, like, but why am I caring about this? Because I don't know nothing about this, so why would I care about the new information?
right,
Yeah.
all right. So, all right, so next question, I'm gonna paraphrase a little bit what he's asking. And so this is as you guys in your SciComm Society, do you guys have resources to do the super condensed version of all these stories, right? So we got the two things, right? So first we've got the title. The title has to pique our interest, or otherwise it's just we're never going to click on it, right? And then we have the abstract as well, right? So we're writing that thing in a very, very concise thing. So can we still use these kind of these tips and right? So maybe the ABT method, or this circle of curiosity, confusion, wonder, and awe in the abstract, and how do we write a title better so we draw our attention in right away?
I think this is a great question. And I really love the idea of applying these, like all of these pillars that we talked about today to each part of scientific presentations, or the abstract, the title, etc. Um, so I actually think that would be a really cool idea for a resource. To like target each of those different parts. But as far as writing a good title, it made me think that, and Sarah challenged me on this if you think it's different, but it seems to me like that's the therefore section of the ABT method, where you would be kind of like stating the conclusion in the title, and you'd still have like the key player and the action in there, and that really makes for a good title. And all of the different parts of the what I talked about with the action verbs, and then trying to keep as few words as possible, and thinking about your jargon. And that really comes down to what audience you want to target, what level and how broad you want to go. What journal are you publishing in, or what kind of a conference are you presenting your poster at? And so you can use more jargon, of course, when you have like the more narrow audience, and then you want to go broad, less jargon with your broad audience. So Sarah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I certainly agree with what you said about the title. You definitely want to spark some curiosity and maybe a little bit of, no, not confusion with the title, probably not, but definitely curiosity and maybe a bit of wonder. But what I'm definitely thinking is what you said about the abstract, or what you asked about the abstract. I think that the circle for sure is going to work in the abstract writing, because what are you doing in an abstract? You provide background knowledge, you show the knowledge gap that is currently in the research field, and then you show them the results, and which for many, if you're from that research field, probably leads to wonder and awe, because like, oh, finally we have that answer that we were all working on or waiting for. So this emotional cycle is definitely working in the abstract for sure.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, so we're running up right on our timeline. So I think we're gonna close it down for now. I want to thank you guys both for coming on and speaking. For all of you guys who are listening, and all the people who are going to be looking at this video later, definitely look for the slides. GOLDBIO will be sending them out as soon as we can. If you have any other questions, specific questions, whatever, please reach out to Justine and Sarah, with SciComm Society. I mean, because I, for one, will appreciate every little bit of better science writing as I'm reading all of your articles constantly, right? So thank you guys for joining us. I hope the SciComm Society just explodes, around you guys in the near future.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much for this. This has been a great opportunity, and thanks for everyone for listening.
No problem. All right. Well,
Thank you.
everybody, have a good week, and we'll catch you next time on the next webinar. Signing off now.